disruptive.
Weird thing to happen. I'm sure many people are aware of the homeless situation in Canada. If you're in a metropolitan area, you've obviously seen tent city after tent city. You've seen the growing rise of people in dire need. And while there's the stereotype of, they're all druggies, they're all drug addicts, and, they're on the street for their own reason, people go on hysterical rants about that. A good majority of them, statistically, a good majority of them do have jobs. They just can't afford a place to live because whatever job they have just can't sustain shelter, food, and whatnot. And a lot of them are veterans and children that are out in the streets. There's a huge number of children that are homeless in this country that completely gets ignored in these statistics. But people are obviously aware of situations like this. This was pointed out from RTN, saying downtown Toronto is in a state of crisis as Freshco lobbies are turned into homeless shelters. So this is outside a grocery store in what appears to be an apartment building or some business high-rise. And they're showing people that outside this grocery store is people sleeping out on the streets. And it's not helping them whatsoever. It's not helping the general public. And this is very frequent around the country. Like I said, if you're in a metropolitan city, you've seen this time and time again. Even if you're not in a big city, you see more and more of this happening.
The state of Toronto right now.
24 hours safe injection site should be a thing with a smoking room.
Is there a reason you're not in the shelter?
Yeah, because they don't fucking have any.
The state of Toronto right now.
So that's outside a grocery store. That there's people all scattered along this lobby that don't have shelter, don't have a space, don't have anywhere to live. And they're obviously in this lobby because there's a roof over their heads that protects them from the weather. But like I said, it's affecting the safety of the public and it's affecting their safety. So what's being done about this? Well, evidently, nothing. Nothing's really being done about this. You can get cops to come in and push them aside and throw them to somewhere else. But then they're just going to go to whatever park or whatever facility and interrupt them. So it's not helping the problem. It's not helping the situation. And as Mario Zelia points out, Toronto is a blank show. Toronto homeless budget is $1 billion. So $1 billion from taxpayers that's allocated to help the homeless population in Toronto. Approximately $51,000 per homeless person. After tax, Canadian median income is $39,000. It's literally cheaper. It's literally cheaper to give each homeless person $45,000, and they would earn more than the median Canadian. Audit this insanity. So that's another big factor on why it's becoming more and more unaffordable to be in this country, is because we're being taxed to death. And the mass amount of taxes, like it's crazy with the mass amount of taxes that that Canada's getting from Canadians. You would think we would have state-of-the-art healthcare. You would think we would have top-notch infrastructure, that there wouldn't be a pothole in sight. You would think this would help the homeless population in a huge way. We'd be building shelters and facilities. No. We do the exact opposite. We drain this country more and more, causing more of these crises, but we give $20 billion off to Ukraine. But we give more to Israel. But we spend more on Arab nations in having gender study facilities abroad. But we don't help people in need. We don't have people on the streets. Primarily, a lot of them are not drug addicts, and a portion of them are veterans and children. We don't do anything for them. So this goes into this publication the Fraser Institute pointed out. It says Toronto taxpayers should demand better of the city's homelessness services. So this guy, Matthew Lau, did this article here. According to a recent City of Toronto report in October 2024, there were an estimated 15,400 people experiencing homelessness in the city, more than double the approximately 7,300 homeless in April of 2021. Of the homeless population, about 80% stay in the city-administered sites, 10% in provincially administered sites, and 10% outdoors. Clearly, homelessness and poverty are significant problems in Toronto, and government should undertake some efforts to tackle these problems and mitigate their efforts. However, whether politicians are using taxpayer money effectively in trying to do so is another matter. And in this case of Toronto's spending on homelessness services, the numbers suggest there's significant room for improvement. In 2024, the gross expenditures operating budget for Toronto Shelter and Support Services, which is responsible for managing homelessness services, was $787.5 million. The capital budget was another $78.2 million. With a homeless population of 15,400, the city's homelessness operating budget alone works out to about $51,000 per homeless person per year. So just note that $51,000 per year to try to bring shelter to homeless people, because I've heard this argument from certain people to just say, we need the cops to go in, bust their heads, and arrest them, throw them into prison. And that's currently what the Trump administration's doing to places like Washington, D.C. That they're suggesting that, well, we got to evict the homelessness out of there, out of the streets, out of places where they don't have anywhere to evict. Like, an eviction requires you to have property. You don't have property. That's why you're homeless. But they want to send them to prisons. The average prison sentence to lock a man in a prison facility, in Ontario at least, is estimated to be $140,000 to $170,000 per year. Per person. That's for one person to lock in prison. So it mathematically, it's cheaper to build shelters, to build facilities. It's mathematically cheaper to actually treat a homeless person with the respect and dignity as any other Canadian than it would be to lock them in prison. And what benefit is that going to do? It's going to cost you more to lock them in a prison, and you're going to surround them with more criminals. How's that going to benefit them? How is that going to transition them back into proper society? How's that going to get them off their feet? That says, for reference, the median after-tax income among Canadians is 2023 was $39,900. In other words, if you took the City of Toronto's homelessness services budget, operating budget in 2024 and divided the cash among the city's homeless population, each homeless person would have 28% higher income than the typical Canadian. Just think about that. Think about that and the direction of where this country is heading towards. It's more feasible in the country of Canada. It's more feasible to be out in the streets and starving than it is to actually be a proper citizen. So maybe instead of pointing the finger at the homeless with no abilities to change policy, that maybe we should putting the blame and putting the finger on politicians. The ones that are capitalizing off of turning the system around. Maybe we should be pointing out the flaws of overtaxing a population, which is causing more and more people to be homeless. Another data point in the report, the average market rent for a bachelor unit in Toronto in 2024 was $1,456 per month, which works out to $17,472 per year. This is 1/3 of that 51% per homeless person to put a roof over their head of each of the 15,400 homeless people. Even at a level of quality such as the amenities and the comfort is comparable to that of the average resident of a bachelor unit in the city. Homelessness services include more than just providing shelter, but again, the wide gap between 17,472 and 51,000 suggests taxpayer money is not efficiently spent. And this is something that I've been pointing out for quite some time. And I noticed this, especially after witnessing other places around the world that had homelessness outbreaks, and they actually came to the revelation to do something about it, and they've actually found solutions to decrease it. In Finland, for example, they're building communities. They're building small, low-income communities to house the homeless people, that people can find shelter and they can get themselves back on their feet. That's the most effective way to actually treat the homelessness. But we don't do that in this country. Even with all the politicians out there that keep telling you and keep promising about low-income housing, we're going to make affordable housing. It never, ever actually comes to be, because those politicians behind closed doors are meeting up with developers. They're meeting up with their lobby firms that are exacerbating the homelessness crisis. They don't want to solve it. They don't want to find a way to decrease the homeless population. Not when these nonprofit charities can make huge bucks on it. Not when politicians can use that to scare and fearmonger people. Not when police services can get an increased budget to push these people around. They're never actually going to solve the homelessness crisis until they realize that the best way to solve the homelessness crisis is to refer to these people as actual civilians, instead of demonizing them for flaws and for drug abuse and whatnot. Hey, here's an idea. Let's create some more rehab facilities so we can actually get people into a safe space so they can actually rehabilitate themselves. But they don't do that. They don't do that in this country, unfortunately. So he says, I am reminded of a 1978 speech by a famed American economist, Milton Friedman, on the welfare state. If you took the total annual revenue, annual welfare expenditures made by federal, state, and local governments in the name of helping the poor, according to Friedman, and divided among the entire population that the government defined as being in poverty, it would work out to $9,000 per person. For comparison, the average after-tax income per person in the United States in those days was $6,500 per year. So think of that. Think of that. You're being taxed relentlessly, thinking that it's going to services that benefit the population, but the services are getting worse. Hospitals are closing up. Your education is falling apart. Roads and infrastructure is collapsing. And what this is saying here, that you can actually give people more money to get themselves on track than is taxing people and hoping that politicians do the right thing. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? If that $9,000 per person were really going to the poor, Friedman explained, they'd be among the rich. That income given to put them on the top 20% of the income distribution. The obvious explanation for what is going on, the money the government spent supposedly on helping the poor wasn't actually going to the poor. The same appears to be true with Toronto's homelessness services spending. Divide the city's homelessness services spending among the homeless, and the homeless could well be considered richer than the average Canadian. Toronto residents aren't alone in having their money spent ineffectively. There's plenty of evidence that governments elsewhere are ineffective in anti-poverty spending. See, for example, a California state auditor report last year detailing the state's significant rise in homelessness, even as 9 state agencies spent $24 billion on at least 30 programs over 5 years to prevent homelessness. Taxpayers in Toronto, California, and elsewhere should demand better. And what they revealed in California, and California is one of the worst for homelessness, what's been revealed is that these so-called nonprofit charities that help the homeless, they're abusing the money. They're abusing the money. They give themselves pay raises. They hire more and more staffers than they need. They rent office spaces in skyscrapers. And then when they actually get to figuring out how to deal with the homeless, they run out of money. They're abusing the system. They're abusing this crisis. Because they realize that heinous people, the people that are abusing the homeless crisis, there's more incentive for themselves to be greedy and spend the money elsewhere than actually resorting into combating the problem. And that's what this report is saying. That's what he's saying there, that taxpayers that are footing the bill for all this should be demanding answers to this. If we're paying 42% of our income, that's according to statistics, 42% of Canadians' income goes towards taxes. If we're paying that, why are we still getting homelessness? Why is it still increasing? Why are hospitals shutting down? Why is our education system such a flaw? Why is our infrastructure collapsing? If we're paying 42% of Canadians' income towards taxes to resolve these problems. So this guy, Bruce McGonagall, says Pierre Poilievre says 50 homeless camps have opened up in Toronto in the past 6 weeks for a total of 256 homeless camps. He blames Justin Trudeau. I do agree with Pierre, but I think Doug Ford, Jagmeet Singh, and Olivia Chow deserve blame too. What do you think? So this is from last year. This is from May of 2024. And while Pierre Poilievre has a lot of flaws, I pointed this out, has flaws. This is one of the times that I actually celebrated his persona because he was the only politician that I'm aware of that actually addressed the homeless crisis, that actually addressed the lineups at food banks. And that's what makes him so significant, is that he was the only person I've seen actually discussing it. His solutions may not be good. Same with Donald Trump. Donald Trump's solutions are awful when it comes to homelessness, but he's the only politician that I'm aware of that even addresses this. So here's Pierre Poilievre in the House of Commons putting forth this crisis of the homelessness spike.
Speaker, in a 6-week period, 50 homeless encampments have opened in Toronto. Let that sink in. There are a total of 256 tent cities in Toronto alone.
Oh my goodness.
It wasn't like this before this Prime Minister, and it won't be like this after he's gone. Will he admit that everything is broken after 9 years of his government?
So 256 homeless encampments, meaning tent cities in these parks, in residential areas, in harm's way. That's affecting your safety and it's affecting their safety. So instead of this idea that homelessness is going to go away with the touch of police officers coming in and sweeping away these 10 cities, out of sight, out of mind theory that people like to have, wouldn't it make more sense if your tax dollars actually worked for you and not against you? Wouldn't it make more sense if we actually invested into this country and provided adequate services, not just for the homeless, but for everybody, it would be beneficial. That would require actually people to step up to the plate and actually hold account to the politicians, actually hold account to leaders, which unfortunately we don't see a lot of. We see a lot of degrading and demonizing our own people and going after our friends, families, and neighbors and the homeless people for a lot of instances they can't deal with themselves. But no one goes after politicians. No one goes after that. And as even I stated, because Government EXE is corrupt, pointed this out. This is in Nova Scotia, where he says, you may not be allowed to go hiking in Nova Scotia these days, but at least you can still camp as long as it's not in the woods. So this is in downtown Halifax, where there's homeless encampments lining about. And I quoted it, and said the homeless crisis in this country is getting worse. Nothing is being done to decrease homeless, but just to exploit the crisis longer. Having cops go in week after week to push them somewhere else isn't a solution. It's just costly BS. Places around the world figure out solutions to the homeless crisis, and instead of learning from them to apply here, we just make it worse. In the words of George Carlin, the homeless are there to scare the middle class into submission. And that's one of my theories on why they refuse to do so. One, because they just have no interest in serving the needs of people, even though they're supposed to be public servants, even though they're supposed to be public representatives. They have no interest in serving you whatsoever. The second thing is, they can use this crisis to scare you, to fearmonger you, and to cause controversy in hoping that you go after the homeless people and demonize them, but not demonize the politicians that are stealing your money, claiming to help them. And as George Carlin stated in one of his stand-up acts, I know that's a paraphrase, I don't know the exact quote, but the homeless are purposely there, and they will continue on to keep this crisis going as long as possible to scare you. So that people will look at that and go, well, if I get out of line and I don't serve the billionaire interest class, I'm going to turn out to be one of those people. I'm going to be out in the street. I'm going to be the one escaping around grocery store lobbies, asking for spare change. So this is a disaster and purposely intended to be a disaster. Like I said, Finland figured it out. You look at even Detroit. You go look at Detroit. They figured out a solution to their homeless crisis. They're buying up properties that have been abandoned and creating these small house facilities that can house the homeless. And it gets them off the streets. It rehabilitates them. It puts them at a place and a point in time where they actually have the self-confidence and determination to get themselves back on their feet. It's been proven. It's been proven time and time, over and over again. But it just seems like Canada just doesn't want to do that. Canada has no intent of rehabilitating itself. Canada has no intent of serving its own people. But they will steal more tax dollars, get these false promises of helping the homeless and creating these affordable housing projects that never actually accomplish the intent of serving and assisting people in need. That all it is a cash grab from taxpayers to serve the interests of the billionaire class, the wealthy elites, the politicians that exploit this crisis for their own benefit. And instead of demonizing the homeless for maybe having life circumstances, maybe having an addiction crisis. You know, addiction is a health struggle. It's not a criminal act, it's a health struggle. So instead of demonizing that person if they're an addict, why are we not demanding our politicians put our tax dollars to use and building facilities? Remember asylums? Remember rehab facilities? That used to be a thing back in the day, but it just doesn't seem to be the case now. It doesn't seem to be the case now. Celebrities use them. Celebrities endorse them. It helps them get back on their feet. So why are we not using the same for the homeless population? Because we don't serve the interest of Canadians. That's what the Fraser Institute is saying there.